Imagine a world where the year 1492 means nothing. A world where the New World was a distant wild frontier already known to a different European flag, a banner of raven and blood-red sail. 500 years before Columbus, a colony was built on North American soil. It had blacksmiths, great halls, and women knitting wool. It had a name, Vinland, and a story so unbelievable it was dismissed as myth for nearly a millennium. This is not a tale of exploration. It is a tale of a brief, brutal, and utterly astonishing settlement that redefined North America's history. From the frozen fjords of Greenland to the grassy northern tip of Newfoundland, this is the true story of Lonzo Meadows, the place where Europe first met America, only to forget the encounter completely. Part 1. The Genesis of the Westward Journey. Chapter 1. The Outlaw and the Green Land. The journey to the western edge of the known world was not a grand campaign of conquest. It was the flight of an outlaw. The saga begins not in North America, but in the desolate, windswept vastness of Iceland, circa 982 A.D. Eric Thorvaldsson, Eric the Red, was a man of magnificent beard, fiery temper, and unyielding pride. Banished first from Norway for manslaughter, he had settled in Iceland, only to find himself embroiled in another bloody feud. The verdict of the Icelandic court was exile, 3 years. To a Norseman of the 10th century, exile was a sentence of death, or worse, a journey into the Utagarar, the outskirts, where the trolls and the Jotun were said to roam. But Eric had heard whispers. A seafaring legend, Gunnbjörn Ulfsson, had been blown far off course decades earlier and had seen land to the west, a rugged, mountainous coast. Eric, a visionary outcast, decided this was not an empty sea, but a new kingdom waiting to be claimed. He provisioned his longship, the Fjord Serpent, and sailed west through a sea shrouded in dense glacial fog. The journey was a brutal baptism. Icebergs, cold as 1,000 winters, drifted like phantom ships. But after weeks of unrelenting toil, the fog lifted, revealing a sight that would change the course of European history. A massive green-rimmed coast of deep fjords and towering glaciated peaks. Eric was a master of marketing, even in an age before paper and ink. He named the forbidding land Greenland. The name was a deliberate, audacious lie, a honey trap for settlers. Men will be the more readily persuaded to settle there if the land has a good name, he reasoned. And it worked. When his 3 years were up, Eric returned to Iceland a celebrated pioneer. He preached the gospel of the green land, its bountiful hunting, its rich pastures, and its isolation, perfect for men who, like him, preferred a kingless existence. By 986 A.D., a fleet of 25 ships loaded with cattle, sheep, timber, and the hopes of hundreds of men, women, and children set sail. Only 14 ships made it. The others were shattered by storms or swallowed by the ice sea. Yet those who arrived established the eastern and western settlements of Norse Greenland. For nearly 5 centuries, this improbable colony would endure, a thin, isolated thread of European civilization clinging to the edge of the Arctic Circle. Greenland was the essential stepping stone. It was the training ground, the staging area, and the psychological frontier that prepared the Norse for the ultimate leap into the unknown, the continent we now call North America.
Chapter 2. The Accidental Discoverer and the Prophecy of Grapes. The Norse presence in Greenland was precarious. They needed timber desperately. The settlement, established in an environment far harsher than Iceland, offered little in the way of building materials. They needed to import wood from Norway, a costly and dangerous voyage, or risk sailing to the mainland of North America, a place of rumor and terrifying potential. The discovery was, like so many great historical events, an accident. Around 985 AD, a merchant named Bjarni Herjolfsson, sailing from Iceland to visit his father in Greenland, was caught in a massive, prolonged gale that blew his Nar, a broad-beamed cargo ship, far to the southwest. When the storm finally abated, Bjarni and his crew sighted land, a low, forested coast entirely unlike the glacial peaks of Greenland. They sailed north, seeing different landscapes, one flat and rocky, another dense with woods. But Bjarni, desperate to reach his family, refused to land. He was looking for mountains, fjords, and ice, the signs of Greenland. He returned to Greenland a failure, mocked by his peers for his cowardice. "You have seen a new land and done nothing with it," they chastised. Yet the seeds of a new venture were sown. The story of Bjarni's sightings became a legend, the saga of a continent just beyond the horizon. Enter Leif Erikson, son of Eric the Red. Leif was a man of his father's ambition, but possessed a cooler, more methodical mind. He was a pioneer, eager to outshine his father's fame. Driven by the lure of cheap, plentiful timber and the whispers of Bjarni's sighting, Leif bought Bjarni's ship and organized an expedition around the year 1000 AD. The saga of the Greenlanders recounts Leif's journey with a geographic precision that astonishes modern scholars. Helluland, land of flat stones. They sailed until they found a barren, icy land of flat slate-gray rock. This is believed to be Baffin Island, or a part of the Labrador coast. Markland, forest land. They sailed further south and found a massive, endless expanse of forest. Timber, the kind that would save the Greenland colony. This is believed to be Labrador. Vinland, wineland. Leif pressed on, seeking a place mild enough to winter. He found a land of grassy meadows, a flowing river, and crucially, a place where his German thrall, Tyrker, discovered wild grapes, or possibly berries used for wine. Leif, embracing the seductive promise of plenty, named the new country Vinland, the land of wine. This was the moment of first contact, the true dawn of European-American history. Leif Erikson had crossed the final frontier, bringing the Viking Age to the shores of the future United States and Canada. He established a temporary base, Leif's Booths, and spent the winter cutting timber and gathering supplies before sailing back to Greenland. He had proven it. The New World was real, and it was ripe for the taking. Chapter 3. The Proof in the Turf and Time. For centuries, Vinland remained a ghost story. The sagas, Erik Saga Roda and Granlenga Saga, were dismissed by most academics as fanciful, nationalistic myth. Columbus was the undisputable discoverer. The Vikings were simply too far, too primitive, too early. Then came the discovery that rewrote the history books. The true story of the Viking colony was unearthed not by an army of archaeologists, but by the quiet persistence of one Norwegian explorer, Helge Ingstad, and his archaeologist wife, Anna Stein Ingstad. In the early 1960s, Helge, armed only with the vague descriptions from the sagas, was determined to find the physical site of Leif's settlement. His quest led him to a tiny, remote fishing village on the northernmost tip of Newfoundland, Canada, L'Anse aux Meadows, a corruption of the French L'Anse aux Médouses, or Jellyfish Cove. The local community spoke of strange, grass-covered mounds on a low, sheltered headland overlooking the sea, long believed to be old indigenous burial sites. Helge Ingstad, convinced of their European origin,
began excavation with his wife. The ensuing 8 years of painstaking work uncovered the indisputable evidence. 3 large Norse-styled turf longhouses, large communal structures built of timber frames covered in thick, insulating sod, exactly like those found in Iceland and Greenland. The main hall was 70 feet long, large enough to house 80 to 90 people. A smithy and a charcoal kiln. Crucially, they found the remains of an iron-working furnace. The indigenous peoples of North America at that time did not smelt iron. The presence of a blacksmith shop, with its charcoal hearth and pieces of slag, iron residue, was a Viking signature. The Norse were dependent on iron for ship repairs, weapons, and tools, an absolute necessity for a transatlantic colony. A bronze cloak pin. A Viking-styled bronze penannular brooch used for fastening cloaks was discovered. Its design was perfectly consistent with 10th and 11th century Norse artifacts.
A spindle whorl. Perhaps the most poignant find, this small carved stone disc was used to weigh down a drop spindle for spinning thread. It was a tool of women's work, providing the first hard evidence that the excavation was not just a raiding party, but a colonizing attempt that included women. The excavation was a monumental, irrefutable achievement. Lonso Meadows was not a myth. It was the actual, tangible site of Leifsbudir, the gateway to Vinland. In 2021, a new, dazzling piece of information arrived. Using a technique that detects a distinct spike of atmospheric radiocarbon caused by an intense solar storm that hit Earth in 992 AD, preserved in tree rings, scientists were able to date 3 pieces of cut wood from the site with breathtaking accuracy. The final tree ring in all 3 samples, the ring formed just before the wood was cut, was dated to 1021 AD. This single, irrefutable scientific fact established a new date for American history, 1021 AD. The Vikings were here, exactly 471 years before Columbus. The forgotten colony was real. Part 2. The Colonization Attempt. Chapter 4. Karlsefni's Grand Design and the Firstborn. The true story of colonization began not with Leif, who merely established a base, but with a wealthy, ambitious Icelandic merchant named Thorfinn Karlsefni, the making of a man. Leif's voyage had confirmed the promise of Vinland: unlimited timber, rich pasture, and a milder climate than Greenland. It was an opportunity that could save the struggling Norse settlements. Around 1004 AD, or shortly after 1021 AD, according to the latest dating, Karlsefni launched the largest North expedition ever attempted across the Western Ocean. His fleet consisted of 3 ships and, according to the sagas, around 160 men, women, and children, along with livestock, cattle, sheep, and goats. This was not a quick raid or a timber-gathering trip. This was a serious, organized attempt at permanent settlement, a true American colony. Karlsefni's wife, Gudrid Torbjornsdottir, was the driving force, a woman of powerful will and great practicality. The sagas paint her as the ultimate pioneer, a figure of strength who guided the settlers through the hardships of the frontier. They established their main base, likely at Lonso Meadows, referred to in the sagas as Stromfjord, the fjord of currents. The early years were a struggle against the unfamiliar environment and the sheer logistics of moving an entire farm system across an ocean. They faced the deep snows of Newfoundland winters and the terror of the isolated unknown. But a profound, historic event soon occurred. While at the new settlement, Gudrid gave birth to a son. They named him Snorri Thorfinnsson. Snorri, born on the North American continent, holds the title of the first European American in recorded history, a full 5 centuries before any child of the Spanish or English colonies. His birth, chronicled in the sagas, cemented the Norse claim to the land and the settlers' determination to stay. Chapter 5. Trade, Wonder, and the Skraelings. The greatest unknown facing the Norse was not the climate, but the inhabitants. The sagas refer to them as Skraelings, a term meaning wretches or possibly people wearing animal skins. These were the indigenous people of the region, likely the ancestors of the Mi'kmaq or the Beothuk of Newfoundland and the Inuit or Dorset people further north. The first encounter, documented in the sagas, was filled with a mixture of wonder and immediate suspicion. The Skraelings arrived in large, hide-covered canoes, marveling at the strange, bearded newcomers and their great winged ships. The Norse, in turn, were captivated by the indigenous people's small, quick bows and their ability to navigate the waters. A period of uneasy, silent trade began. The Skraelings were desperate for the Norse's metal goods, especially their axes and swords. The Norse, however, coveted the abundance of fine furs and pelts that the indigenous people possessed. The agreed currency became milk, specifically the thick, rich cream from the Norse cattle. The Skraelings had never encountered dairy products and, initially, found them intoxicating. However, the cultural chasm was too vast to bridge. The Norse, viewing themselves as superior, were protective of their tools and weapons. The Skraelings, practical and driven by necessity, often attempted to steal iron axes, a resource that was a matter of life and death in a forest environment. The peaceful trade quickly turned to hostility. The sagas record the first bloody conflict. A Skraeling attempting to steal a Norse axe was killed. His people returned in force, raining arrows down upon the small Norse encampment. The Norse, highly armed and armored, were formidable warriors, but the Skraelings possessed a frightening tactical advantage. They could fade into the dense, endless forest, striking without warning and disappearing before a counterattack could be launched. They were a threat not to be fought, but to be feared, an ever-present, terrifying shadow on the edge of the woods.